it depends on what ranking you use. Anyway, but let me tell you something about Jonathan. He is still one of us. You know, we've got some good people down there, but they go down there and they vote the right way. But this guy is on the phones recruiting good people all the time. That's why the establishment hates him. That's why they run someone against him and throw millions of dollars against him, because they can't stand him. Because he is one of us. He is determined to make sure that we have a more conservative Austin. He's not just concerned about his race. He actually puts his own career down there in jeopardy by trying to find and recruit and help good conservatives running down there. And that's one of the things that is so special about that guy. And he's an inspiration to me and an inspiration to most conservative leaders across the state of Texas. And so thank you so much, Jonathan, for everything you do. Okay, now we're going to turn to U.S. politics, and we're going to get to hear from Wade Miller from Heritage Action. This is Jim DeMint's Action Group. He's going to give us an update on what's happening in Washington, D.C.
Don't have a lot of time, so I'll be real brief. There's three issues. The first one is the most complicated, so I'll get to that one first, and that has to do with the budget blueprint. And so for those of you who may not be aware, in December they voted on an omnibus bill. This omnibus bill funded everything that the government does, Obamacare, Planned Parenthood, the Syrian refugee program, Obama's amnesty programs. It increased spending by $80 billion. This was a Republican-held Congress. That is actually the end result of a year-long process. We're actually at the beginning of that process for this year, which will affect spending in 2017. And so the first step is a budget blueprint. And the only two real important factors of a budget blueprint are that it kind of sets out an agenda for what we want to achieve on the appropriations. They never live up to that. That's why you usually see really nice budget blueprints. Often they'll balance the budget, but that never actually happens in the fall. And then the other thing is it sets a discretionary spending cap. Discretionary spending is only 29% of the budget. Mandatory spending is 65%. But the budget blueprint sets a limit. It says you cannot spend while you're appropriating any more than this. Well, on the omnibus bill in December, they increased that cap. They said we're going to spend more money on the discretionary side. They increased it by $30 billion, from $1.04 trillion to $1.07 trillion. That was passed. That was the Boehner-Obama deal. We're now getting to the budget blueprint. Leadership, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, they are trying to embrace this spending increase. And so Heritage Action and the conservative movement has said, no, if you're going to put out a budget blueprint, it needs to reduce that discretionary spending cap back down to the lower levels. Normally, in past years, they've just kind of rammed this stuff through. The good news is that even though this passed out of committee, it's dead right now. They don't have enough votes. We've gotten enough votes to kind of stop this. The problem is they're going to find parliamentary tricks. And one of these that you might hear is that, well, we're going to give you $30 billion in mandatory spending cuts. The problem is that's unenforceable. You can't do that through a budget blueprint. What will happen is that later on this year, they'll offer a standalone bill that offers $30 billion in mandatory spending cuts. They might even pass it. Obama will veto it. So they'll get their discretionary spending cuts, they'll get their show vote on mandatory spending, and at the end of the day, they'll get the increased spending that they absolutely wanted. So our ask on the budget is that any member of Congress does not support a budget blueprint unless it cuts discretionary spending back down to the previous levels. They can go even lower than that if they want to. The RSC put out their budget. It called for a $987 billion discretionary spending limit, which is even lower, and we're happy with that. But it shouldn't increase, and that's what they're getting ready to do and they're trying to do. Right now we're holding steady on that. If they can't agree on a budget, our ask is that they just don't pass one. After May 15th, you can move straight into appropriations. Most members of Congress don't even realize that. They're under the assumption that you have to pass a budget before you can do appropriations. You don't. Our ask would be to go into appropriations and just start appropriating at those lower levels automatically. Don't wait for the Senate to agree with you on it. So that's the budget issue. And right now, urge your members of Congress to stay strong on that. Another issue is the Supreme Court. Just today, we saw a decision that came down which basically held, because it was a tie, Justice Scalia unfortunately passed away. If he had not passed away, we would have won. But the holding was that in this tie, affirmed the lower court ruling, which basically said that the government can automatically deduct fees from federal employees for the unions, even if they're not in the union. So they're basically being forced to subsidize unions. Unions, of course, go out and donate hundreds of millions of dollars to Democrats. This is something that we're already feeling the effects of the Supreme Court case. So our ask is that we do not advance the process to confirm Garland Merrick, who is the nominee of Obama right now. This is a very far-left judge. Despite all the rhetoric you might hear saying otherwise, he has been, even by the New York Times, is rated just as liberal as Sotomayor and Elena Kagan and all those other liberal justices. He's very anti-Second Amendment. If this person is confirmed and a gun case moves forward, there's a high likelihood that the Second Amendment could lose all value from a legal sense. Now, from a personal sense, I'll just ignore them. But from a legal sense, it would be very problematic. So right now, our ask is do not move forward with a confirmation, with a hearing or a confirmation vote on the Supreme Court. The Constitution only requires advice and consent. The Senate should advise the president that they're not going to have a hearing. They're going to wait until after the elections. So please encourage John Cornyn. Senator Cruz is solid on this. John Cornyn, in theory, is on our side on this. Unfortunately, behind the scenes and even publicly, he's putting out some very distressing statements. One of them was that the only reason he's supporting this, and he would not have done this, is because Mitch McConnell said so, which is just completely spineless in my opinion. We need him to stand strong. I think he will, but he needs to be hearing it from y'all. We're already seeing people like Jerry Moran in Kansas, Senator Jerry Moran. He's already saying that we need to have a hearing and that that's their job. Well, no, their job is to support and defend the Constitution. And if there is a Supreme Court justice who's going to be openly hostile to the Second Amendment, then their job is to not have a hearing, let alone have a vote on that Supreme Court justice. We'll wait until after the elections, see what the voters say, and then we'll move forward and make decisions from there. And then the very last issue that's moving at the federal level is the First Amendment Defense Act. And all over the country, we're seeing federal employees being affected by government agencies that want to discriminate against people who it is their faith and belief that marriage is between a man and a woman. The First Amendment is already very clear on this, but we think that the First Amendment Defense Act, which by the way has the support of every single member and Republican member of Texas, with the exception of Ted Poe, but even behind the scenes Ted Poe is on our side and will probably vote for it. We even got Will Hurd down in San Antonio to co-sponsor this. The problem is that even though there's over 200 Republicans that support this, the committee is not pushing it forward. So encourage your members to encourage those committees to move forward with the First Amendment Defense Act. It's very important that Congress assert the legislative intent, because right now courts are leaning very heavily on things like legislative intent in their rulings. This is what they think the Congress means by certain laws. So Congress needs to be very clear that the Constitution absolutely protects and further pass laws further protecting federal workers and federal employees from discrimination on this issue. That is basically it right now, because there's so much going on with elections and the presidential politics. Not a lot is moving, but there's a lot of damage that can be done. So my advice would be encourage senators to vote, to tell their members to not hold hearings, let alone vote on a Supreme Court justice until after the election. Encourage them to push the First Amendment Defense Act. We want to vote on that, this Congress. And then also pay attention throughout the summer. You're going to be seeing them on the budget try to put out all these gimmicks. And at the end of the year, it will probably culminate in them trying to push another big omnibus bill. And they're not going to want to fight on an omnibus bill going into a major election. So be aware that they may be positioning themselves now to not do their jobs throughout the summer so they have an excuse to cave this fall for purposes of presidential politics. And that's all. If anyone has questions, I'll be here afterwards. Thanks.